Hello pros, and welcome to this episode of Build Like a Pro TV. Today we got a great topic for you. We're going to talk about how much your labor actually costs you. Okay, so today we're going to talk about how much your labor actually costs you. There's a big difference between what you pay your field people and what they actually cost you. As we go through this, we're just going to kind of talk about everything you need to add to the actual wage cost to get your total cost of what your employees cost you. So before we get going on this, we had a couple questions from last week's video, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to revisit something I talked about. So when we talked about estimating in the 4 parts of the estimate, I told you guys when you first start out, usually what you do is you pay yourself out of your labor budget. Well, that's correct. And I got some feedback saying, well, I always want to be out in the field. I always want to be the guy swinging the hammer or something. Well, that's cool. You guys do you. Whatever you think is the best for you, that's the path you should go down. But that doesn't change the fact you still need to be adding margin to your jobs. Margin is what helps you grow your company and helps you build wealth as you go through the process of your business. You always want to have some extra cash around, which comes from the margin, so that you can always have a little buffer in your operations. So if you want to be a drywall taper for the rest of your life, that's great. You should be a drywall taper for the rest of life. That doesn't change the fact that you still need to put margin on your bids so that you can help yourself in the future. Today's kind of episode is kind of about the difference between wage rate and labor rate. Wage rate is what you actually pay your field guys and gals hourly for the services they do for you. So if you're paying somebody $10, $15, $20 an hour, that's what they're actually making. That's not what they're costing you. There's a difference between labor rate and wage rate. Labor rate is a total all-inclusive cost of what your employees cost you per hour. Wage rate is just what you actually end up paying them an hour. Okay, so the formula for labor rate is actually wage rate plus payroll tax plus fringes. Now we all know what the wage rate is. We just talked about that. That's what actually gets paid to the field personnel that are working for you. That's their $15 or $20 an hour they're taking home on their check. The payroll tax, as we all know, when we get a paycheck and we look at the paycheck and we see all the taxes taken out, that's payroll tax. But that's only the employee side of the payroll tax is what they're seeing. There's actually a payroll tax as a business owner you have to pay also. That's part of the payroll tax that needs to go on top of the labor rate. Now, don't get too overwhelmed by this. We're going to go through a couple examples so that we can actually do the math on how this actually works and what it actually costs. Now, on top of the payroll tax, we have to add fringes. Fringes are things like health insurance, employer-paid health insurance, vacation time, training, anything else you provide your employees. Maybe you can put a little money in there to have a summer get-together or something with employees, or a Christmas party or a Christmas bonus. That's kind of up to you how you guys want to run it, but that is basically what goes into the total cost of your labor. So to start out, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic, taxes. Now, I don't want your eyes to roll back in your head, but we're going to get very specific on this, and if you kind of go, oh my god, this is way too much for me, don't worry. Like I said, we're going to do a specific example. So there are certain payroll taxes that everybody pays, and there are certain taxes that you're only going to pay depending on where you're at. So basically, starting out, everybody has to pay the federal. That's the big government. That's what the federal government's going to take from everybody's paycheck, no matter if you're in Nebraska like me, Florida, Alabama, Texas, Washington State, doesn't matter. Everybody has to pay this tax. That's called the FICA tax. And everybody's familiar with Social Security and Medicaid. Well, Medicare. That's actually what the FICA tax is. And that's a set rate amount. You can actually go on Google and you can actually Google what, as an employer, your portion of that rate is. So that portion is actually 7.65% right now. It's been that way for a while. We never know if it's going to go up or down. But that's why you have a good accountant, like we talked about in our first episode, right? Because a good accountant will tell you exactly what you need to collect for that. The second part of it is a federal unemployment tax. I don't really know why they needed a tax, the unemployment, because I'm not sure what it does. But anyway, we still have to pay that tax. So that tax is an additional 6% for the first $7,000 of wages, which is really confusing, right? We got a little bit of tax for a little bit of wages. just what I do is I just put it on everything I pay everybody. That way you don't have to worry that you're not covered. And then the last part of it is there's possibly a state unemployment tax depending on which state you're in. Like I said, in Nebraska, we do have a state unemployment tax. It's variable depending on what classification they classify you as, so it gets even more confusing. But we're going to go through an example, and we're just kind of say, well, I'm going to pick a number, and we're going to roll with that number, and that's going to how we're going to figure out our labor rate today. And the last thing is, there might be a local payroll tax depending on what city you're in. Again, that goes back to check with your accountant to see if that's something that applies to you. So on top of the payroll tax, we talked about fringes. So fringes are things like employer-paid health insurance plans. Now, if you're providing your employees health insurance and you're paying a portion of it, that portion of that you are paying gets rolled into the labor rate under a fringe. Another thing that they talk about is employee training. Employee training can be things like you're taking an hour or two out of every productive work week to kind of go over things of your craft. Basically, you have a class of practicing your craft, whether it's, we practice, you're a trim carpenter, you practice hanging a door or setting some base trim. You're an electrician, you practice drilling holes in the right place so the wire goes through it right. Wiring up an outlet, stuff like that. That would be basic training that you would add on top of your labor rate so that you can recoup that cost when you're bidding jobs. And another thing would be something like employee paid vacation time. When you pay your employees, that's still a cost to you to go on vacation. But you need to recoup that cost in your bids so that you have a little bit of money in the bank put away so that you can pay those employees their vacation. Okay, here's an actual real life example of how to calculate a labor rate. So I'm just going to say you're paying somebody who works for you $20 an hour. They can be a foreman, they can be a laborer, they can be a skilled trades craftsman, whatever it is. We're just saying you're paying them $20 an hour. Now, in some parts of the country, obviously you're going to go, well, that's way too much no matter what they do. Other parts you're going to say, I can't hire somebody for only $20 an hour. Well, it kind of depends on where you're at. You can adjust this rate up and down. This is just the math of how you actually get to the end rate. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the FICA at 7.65%, add that into the labor rate. I've already done the math with the calculator before I started this, and I came up with like $1.53. So $1.53 is what you need to add to that $20 to cover your FICA cost. Same thing with FUTA. That's 6%. So like I said, that only applies to the first $7,000 of wages, but realistically it's not that big of a number if you just include it on all the wages. That way when you don't have to pay it, when they go over $7,000, you can actually have a little bit of cushion in your labor rate, which is always a good thing. And you can actually take that money, bank it for a rainy day or something like that. So add the 6%, that gets you another $1.20 an hour. In Nebraska, like I said, the state unemployment, it's on a variable scale because we can't make taxes simple, right? If we just made taxes simple, everybody would know how to do it and we actually wouldn't need accountants. But anyway, that's another subject. So I just threw in 5%, so that's another 80 cents an hour. And you can see there, we took our base labor rate, added our payroll tax, we came up with $23.53 an hour. So that's step number one covered. Okay, step number two is if you provide employer-paid health insurance and you pay a portion of the plan. So this obviously gets to be a big number. It's kind of a hot topic right now in our society of health insurance. So providing your employees health insurance is a great way to motivate your employees, hire new employees, and recruit future employees. So I always think it's a great thing if you guys can do it, provide your employees health insurance, but it is a big cost. So here's how you figure the cost per hour of what you're providing to your employees. And again, I just picked out a random number of $1,000 a month of what it's going to cost you per employee to provide health insurance. Now the way we do this is we take that $1,000 and divide it by a typical work week is 174 hours, or sorry, a typical work month is 174 hours. That's based on 40 hours a week. Now I know some of you guys and gals are going to say, I've got 40 hours by the time I start Thursday morning. Okay, I get it. But we got to start somewhere, so let's just start with 40 hours a week. At 40 hours a week, that $1,000 is going to add approximately $5.75 to that labor cost. So adding that $575 to what we had, we end up with $29.28. I think it's $29.28. Yep. I have my glasses on, I can't see. It's $29.28. Okay, so the next thing we're going to throw in there is vacation time. So if I'm going to give my guys and gals that work for me 2 weeks of vacation per year, that's 80 hours of unproductive time that I'm going to have to pay them for their vacation time. This is a fringe benefit to them, and it's great to have vacation time because it's so hard to hire good employees that having vacation is just kind of a standard thing right now, and you need to recruit good employees to grow your company. In fact, a lot of companies are actually going to more than 2 weeks of vacation time. But for this example, we're just going to say you're paying 2 weeks of vacation time. So we're going to take that $29.28 an hour, multiply it by 80 hours for a year, because that's 2 weeks of vacation time, right? Again, divide that by the hourly total numbers, hours per year, just like we did in the last slide. I'm not going to go through the math again because you guys can rewind if you want, or if you really want to know how to do any of this and you have a question about it, go ahead and contact me on Facebook or through our website, buildlikeapro.com, and I'll actually help walk you through this a little more specifically. But the end number that we got when we add the vacation time is it costs about $1.20 an hour more as part of your labor rate to provide that 2 weeks of vacation time to your employees. Now add on top of that some training time. I threw in 40 hours. 40 hours sounds like a lot, but that's actually less than an hour per week of training for your employees. So maybe that sounds like too much, maybe that sounds like not enough. You guys can adjust up or down. It's just a number. As long as you get the actual math right, it doesn't really matter. You guys can adjust this to your business however you want to. But with the 40 hours a week, I came up with about 60 cents an hour is what we need to add to our labor rate. So adding that vacation time and the training time into the labor rate on top of the payroll tax gets you to about $31 an hour. So that is your basic labor rate. If you're paying somebody 20 bucks an hour, they are costing you $31 an hour. And again, some of these numbers go up and down depending on where you're at, but that's why you guys need a good accountant to actually make sure that your percentages are right on what you're adding to your labor rate. But it's just a good example of your labor, in this case, costs you about 50% more than what you're actually paying them. So you want to make sure in your bids, you're not just putting in the $20 an hour you're paying them. You need to account for all the stuff on top of it and actually putting in about $31 an hour to your bids. Now the last thing I'm going to talk about is something that's not particularly part of labor rate, but it's something that I add when I'm figuring this stuff just because I want to make sure I'm covered, and if I do it now, I know that I'm covered for all my bids. And that is something called STS, or small tools and supplies. Could also be called consumables, which I understand tools aren't consumables, but sometimes depending on what you do, you have consumables that get used up and they need to be replaced. For what I do in my normal daily work, about 10% of the labor rate goes to us replacing tools that either get used or damaged or need to be replaced throughout the year, and that way we have a budget already plugged into our labor rate to cover all those expenses. Now I know everybody should take care of their tools, but the reality is tools wear out and they need to be replaced. So if a guy needs a shovel to do his job and he breaks the handle on a shovel, it's not really, well, it could be his fault depending if he was using a shovel wrong. But he's still going to need a shovel to do his job, and you're going to have to go out and buy him a shovel to do his job. This way you have a budget already programmed into your bid to cover the cost of buying him a shovel. Hope that kind of wraps it up. I hope that explained it well for you guys. If you have any questions, go ahead and get a hold of us on Instagram or YouTube or Facebook or any of those platforms. Ask us a question. We can actually talk about it next week. We can talk about it one-on-one. Anything you guys need from us, go ahead and let us know. And until next week, we'll see you on Build Like a Pro TV. And the Fringes, not the burden. Yeah, fuck it, let's try that one again. Also all dependent on how you run your business. If you give vacation time, how much vacation time you provide your employees, and how much training time you actually want to put into what you provide your employees. Let's try that one again. That was pretty good. Go ahead and check out our other platforms like buildlikeapro.com. We have an Instagram page, buildlikeapro. Facebook page, buildlikeapro1. Obviously, we're on Twitter at buildlikeapro. And we also even have a LinkedIn page for Build Like a Pro. And definitely check us out on YouTube. Make sure you hit the subscribe button popping up on the screen right now. And don't forget to push that little bell so you get reminders.